Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this powerful Christmas story. On Christmas night, when New York was wrapped in a rare, suffocating silence beneath heavy snowfall, the city's lights glittered like frozen stars, unaware that a quiet tragedy was unfolding in the shadows of a towering glass building downtown. Victor Moretti, a name spoken in whispers across the underworld, stood in his penthouse office staring out at the storm. To the world, he was a billionaire CEO with a sharp suit and sharper instincts. To those who truly knew him, he was the Mafia boss who ruled with discipline, fear, and absolute control. Victor did not believe in holidays, warmth, or mercy. Christmas was just another night of ledgers, power, and strategy. Yet something felt wrong. The building was too quiet. His assistant, Elena Carter, had failed to bring him his usual late-night report. She was always punctual, painfully loyal, and invisible in the way only hard-working employees ever were. When Victor glanced at the clock and saw it was nearing midnight, irritation burned in his chest. Elena had never been late. Never. He reached for his phone to call security, but before he could, a sudden power fluctuation dimmed the lights. Annoyed, he decided to go downstairs himself, his footsteps echoing as he moved through the marble corridors. The elevator descended slowly, almost reluctantly, as if warning him. When the doors opened to the lobby, a blast of cold air hit him like a slap. The front doors were ajar. Snow had blown inside, dusting the polished floor with white. Victor's jaw tightened. Someone would pay for this. He stepped outside, his expensive coat useless against the biting wind, and that was when he saw her. Elena lay near the steps, half covered in snow, her dark hair frozen to the ground, her body trembling weakly. For a moment, Victor simply stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. This was impossible. His employee, his loyal, quiet, tireless assistant, collapsing in the snow like she had been discarded. Rage erupted inside him, raw and violent, shattering the iron control he had spent a lifetime perfecting. Elena, he shouted, his voice cracking the night. He rushed to her side, kneeling without a thought for the snow soaking into his tailored pants. Her skin was ice cold. Her lips were blue. She tried to speak, but only a faint breath escaped. Victor clenched his fists, fury coursing through him, not at her, but at the world, at his building, at every system that had failed to protect someone under his command. He scooped her into his arms with surprising gentleness, carrying her back inside as he barked orders into his phone, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Security, medical staff, chauffeurs, everyone was summoned instantly. As he laid her on the lobby couch, memories surfaced uninvited. Elena had been there for 3 years, working late nights without complaint, defending him in boardrooms, quietly shielding him from problems he never noticed. She never asked for favors. Never took days off. Tonight, she had stayed late to finish work so others could go home for Christmas. The realization hit him like a punch. She hadn't collapsed by accident. She had been locked out. Abandoned. When the building's heat malfunctioned, when security cleared the floors, no one checked for her. And that negligence ignited something dangerous inside Victor Moretti. Paramedics arrived quickly, but Victor hovered like a storm cloud, his eyes dark, his presence suffocating. As they worked to stabilize Elena, he interrogated his head of security with a low, terrifying calm that promised consequences. Someone had ignored protocol. Someone had failed to notice a woman freezing steps away from luxury and warmth. Victor's empire was built on loyalty, and betrayal, whether intentional or careless, was unforgivable. When Elena was rushed to the hospital, Victor followed in his armored car, his thoughts spiraling. This woman knew secrets. She knew his schedules, his deals, his silences. Yet she had never betrayed him. And now she lay between life and death because she was invisible. At the hospital, Victor stood outside the emergency room, his coat still dusted with snow, his hands shaking slightly as he waited. He told himself it was anger. Only anger. Not concern. Not guilt. But when the doctor finally emerged and said she would survive, though barely, Victor closed his eyes in relief he refused to acknowledge. Christmas lights blinked in the hallway, mocking him. For the first time in years, Victor Moretti felt something crack inside his chest, not weakness, but awareness. Power had made him untouchable, but it had also made him blind. As he looked through the glass at Elena lying unconscious, wrapped in blankets and machines, a promise formed silently in his mind. Whoever was responsible would be punished. And Elena Carter, his loyal employee, would never be invisible again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but the coldest storm had already begun inside the heart of the Mafia boss, setting the stage for a Christmas that would change everything. Victor Moretti did not leave the hospital even after dawn crept through the frosted windows, painting the sterile hallway in pale winter light. The snowstorm outside had softened, but inside his mind, everything was still roaring. He stood like a statue outside Elena Carter's room, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest through the glass. Machines beeped quietly, each sound a reminder of how close she had come to dying alone in the cold. The doctor had explained hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion, words Victor rarely tolerated, now burned into his memory. Elena had been working nearly 16 hours straight, trying to finish an end-of-year financial reconciliation that no one else wanted to touch during the holidays. When the building's heating system malfunctioned and security began clearing floors, she hadn't heard the announcement. By the time she realized the building was shutting down, the doors were already locked, and the temperature had dropped fast. She'd tried calling for help. No one answered. The thought made Victor's hands clench. In his world, loyalty was everything. Elena had given it freely, without fear or expectation, and his system had nearly killed her for it. As the sun rose higher, Victor finally turned away from the room and pulled out his phone. His voice was calm when he called his operations chief, Marco Russo, but that calm was lethal. Victor ordered a full internal review, security logs, maintenance reports, access card data, every minute accounted for. No one was to be spared scrutiny. Christmas or not. When Marco hesitated, mentioning the holiday, Victor cut him off with a single sentence that froze him solid. If she had died, would Christmas have mattered? The line went silent before Marco agreed. Hours later, Victor sat alone in a private hospital lounge, untouched coffee cooling in front of him. His mind drifted backward, to moments he had dismissed as insignificant. Elena staying late to triple-check documents. Elena bringing him dinner because he forgot to eat. Elena reminding him of meetings he pretended not to care about. She had been present in his life in a way few people ever were, quietly holding pieces of his empire together while remaining unseen. And that invisibility had nearly cost her everything. When the nurse finally allowed him inside, Victor approached Elena's bed slowly. Her face was pale, lashes dark against her skin, a bruise forming near her temple where she had collapsed onto the concrete. Seeing her like this did something unsettling to him. He was used to seeing people broken, enemies, rivals, traitors, but never someone who trusted him completely. He pulled a chair close and sat down, lowering his voice as if she could hear him. He told her she was safe now. That she would never be left alone again. He didn't know why he said it, only that the words felt necessary. Later that day, the reports began arriving. The heating system failure had been flagged hours earlier, but the repair request was delayed because of reduced holiday staff. Security had followed standard shutdown protocol but failed to do a final sweep of the upper floors. Elena's access card showed she attempted to exit twice before collapsing outside the main doors. Each detail added another layer to Victor's fury. This wasn't sabotage. It was worse. It was carelessness. The kind of negligence that thrived in organizations that forgot the human cost of efficiency. By evening, Victor left the hospital only to return to his penthouse, where Christmas decorations glowed uselessly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He poured himself a drink and didn't touch it. Instead, he stood staring at the city below, replaying the image of Elena in the snow. That night, he made decisions that would ripple far beyond one employee's suffering. He authorized immediate restructuring of his security division, firing 2 senior managers without warning. Maintenance contracts were rewritten. Holiday protocols were changed permanently. But it wasn't enough. The anger in his chest demanded more than policy fixes. It demanded accountability. The next morning, Victor returned to the hospital just as Elena began to wake. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, confusion clouding her gaze until she focused on him. Fear flickered across her face, followed quickly by embarrassment. She tried to sit up, apologizing weakly for causing trouble, for missing deadlines, for being careless. The words struck Victor harder than any insult ever had. He leaned forward, his voice low but intense, telling her she had done nothing wrong. That the failure was his. Elena stared at him, shocked. No one had ever heard Victor Moretti admit fault. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of exhaustion finally lifting. She whispered that she hadn't wanted to go home until everything was finished. Victor told her that from now on, nothing mattered more than her safety. He ordered her weeks of paid leave, full medical care, and insisted she recover without thinking about work. When she protested, he silenced her with a look that allowed no argument. As he left the room, something inside him shifted. This wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt alone. It was recognition. Elena was no longer just an employee. She was a reminder of the cost of his world. And while Victor Moretti had built his empire on control, ChristmasNight had proven that control was an illusion. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that within the heart of one of its most feared men, a line had been crossed, one that would change how he ruled, how he punished, and how fiercely he protected what was his. The days following Elena's return to headquarters were filled with tension, subtle shifts, and unspoken challenges. Victor Moretti had grown accustomed to operating in a world where control was absolute, where loyalty was demanded and enforced, and where every decision was measured by its effect on power. But Elena's survival and rise had disrupted that equilibrium. Her presence was no longer invisible, it had become a force that others could neither ignore nor manipulate easily. Even senior executives, who had long felt untouchable under Victor's iron rule, began to notice the subtle shift in authority. They watched Elena carefully, measuring her influence, unsure whether her proximity to Victor was a threat or a signal of change within the organization. Elena herself was keenly aware of the new dynamic. She had always been meticulous, observant, and strategic, but now every action she took was scrutinized. A misstep could be dangerous, not only to her standing but potentially to her life. She had survived the snow, yes, but survival in Victor's world meant far more than just enduring physical danger, it required navigating politics, ambition, and hidden agendas with precision. One evening, while reviewing financial and operational reports, Elena noticed an anomaly, a series of small, almost imperceptible transfers that didn't align with usual accounting patterns. At first, she dismissed it as clerical error, but the pattern repeated across multiple accounts and departments. Her instincts, honed by years of observation and responsibility, screamed that something was amiss. She immediately flagged the issue to Victor, who, upon seeing her findings, went silent for a moment, a rare occurrence for a man whose mind was constantly racing with calculations and contingencies. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes narrowing. "This isn't negligence," he said quietly. "This is deliberate." Elena's pulse quickened. The implication was clear. Someone within the organization had been exploiting weaknesses, siphoning funds, and undermining operations. Victor instructed her to dig deeper, but with extreme caution. Whoever was behind this was calculating and patient, skilled enough to avoid detection for months. Over the next several days, Elena worked tirelessly, combing through data, tracing transactions, and analyzing behavioral patterns of executives and operatives. Each discovery reinforced the unsettling truth: betrayal had emerged from within. Victor, meanwhile, monitored her progress closely, not out of mistrust but out of concern. He had seen the dangers that awaited those who operated in shadows and knew that Elena's life could be at risk if the traitor realized she was onto them. Late one night, Elena discovered the final piece of the puzzle. Richard Hale, the man they had thought removed entirely from Victor's operations, had left behind allies and contingency plans that had quietly continued undermining Victor's empire. The audacity of the scheme was shocking, and for the first time, Elena felt the full weight of the world she had stepped into. She informed Victor immediately, placing all evidence on his desk. Victor reviewed it methodically, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, but lethal in its precision. "He underestimated us," he said. "And that's his mistake." Plans were set into motion immediately. Victor's team moved with surgical efficiency to neutralize the remaining elements of Hale's network, freezing accounts, isolating collaborators, and eliminating access points. Elena was included in every step, her knowledge critical to ensuring the operation succeeded without collateral damage. The dismantling of Hale's residual influence was swift and decisive, leaving no room for retaliation. Yet even with the threat neutralized, the lessons lingered. Victor recognized, perhaps for the first time, that reliance on unchecked authority alone was insufficient. Loyalty could not be assumed, vigilance had to be constant. Elena had demonstrated that foresight, intuition, and courage were as essential to leadership as power. This realization reshaped Victor's approach, both professionally and personally. In the weeks that followed, Victor publicly reinforced Elena's position within the organization, announcing promotions, responsibilities, and authority that signaled to all that she was indispensable. This public acknowledgement had the dual effect of cementing loyalty among supporters and deterring those who might consider subversion. For Elena, the recognition was both empowering and sobering. She understood the gravity of her role, the weight of responsibility she now carried, and the constant danger that came with visibility in Victor's world. Despite the ever-present threat, she had grown stronger, more confident, and more resilient. Victor, observing her transformation, felt a mixture of pride and an unfamiliar vulnerability. He realized that his protective instincts, once solely about control, were now entwined with genuine care, a recognition that Elena was not just an asset, but someone he could not afford to lose, not to rivals, betrayal, or the chaos of the underworld. Their bond, forged in crisis, had matured into mutual trust and understanding, silently acknowledged and never questioned. By the time winter began to give way to the tentative warmth of spring, the organization had stabilized, stronger and more unified than before. Elena's insights and strategic decisions had prevented further threats, and Victor had adapted his leadership style to incorporate vigilance tempered by foresight. Both had changed irrevocably, shaped by the events of the past months. And as they stood together, surveying the city from the penthouse where it all began, they understood one truth: survival had brought them closer, not just as allies, but as partners. The trials they had endured, the snow, the betrayal, the threats, had not broken them. They had strengthened them. And in the quiet moments, as snow melted into rain and the city moved obliviously below, both Victor and Elena knew that together, they were prepared for whatever new challenges the underworld might throw their way. Their story, born from a freezing Christmas night, had become a testament to loyalty, resilience, and the unbreakable bond forged in adversity. By the time winter began to loosen its grip on the city, Victor Moretti's empire looked the same from the outside: cold, powerful, untouchable, but inside, its foundations had shifted. The removal of Richard Hale sent a shockwave through every level of the organization. Meetings were quieter, decisions faster, and loyalty more carefully displayed. Elena felt the change immediately. People no longer questioned her authority openly, but their eyes followed her with a new calculation. She was no longer just Victor's assistant or strategist, she was the woman who had survived the cold, uncovered a traitor, and remained standing. That visibility brought respect, and danger. Victor increased her security without asking, placing 2 discreet operatives within reach at all times. Elena resented it at first, seeing it as another reminder that her life was no longer fully her own, but she understood the necessity. Enemies didn't always announce themselves. Sometimes they waited. Victor himself was restless. Power struggles were familiar territory, but this one had left an aftertaste he didn't like. Richard's betrayal confirmed what Victor had feared since Christmas night: his world punished loyalty while rewarding ambition. He began attending meetings he once delegated, asking questions that unsettled senior figures. Policies tightened. Mistakes that once slid by unnoticed now carried consequences. Some welcomed the clarity. Others quietly planned exits, or worse. Elena, meanwhile, focused on building systems that reduced dependence on any single individual. She worked tirelessly, not to please Victor, but to protect the structure from the kind of negligence that had nearly killed her. One evening, as the city thawed under early spring rain, Elena received an anonymous message on her secure phone. No sender, no signature, just coordinates and a warning: you don't know how deep this goes. Her instincts screamed danger. She took the message straight to Victor. He read it once, then again, his expression darkening. This wasn't a bluff. Someone inside the organization, or close to it, was testing boundaries. Victor ordered an immediate investigation, but Elena felt uneasy. The message felt personal, targeted. She suggested they treat it as bait. Victor didn't like the idea of her anywhere near a potential trap, but he also knew her instincts were rarely wrong. Against his better judgment, they crafted a plan together. Elena would appear to follow her normal routine while Victor's people quietly monitored every movement, every signal. The coordinates led to an abandoned warehouse near the docks, neutral territory, often used for off-the-books exchanges. Days passed with no further contact. Elena began to wonder if the message had been nothing more than a scare tactic. Then, late one night, her security detail flagged unusual activity near her apartment. A car idling too long. A figure disappearing into an alley. Victor arrived personally, fury barely contained, insisting she stay with him for the night. The argument that followed was sharp and honest. Elena accused him of smothering her independence. Victor accused her of underestimating the threat. Beneath the words was something neither wanted to name, fear of losing the other. The silence that followed was heavy. Eventually, Victor softened, admitting he didn't trust the world to keep her safe. Elena, in turn, admitted she didn't want to be brave alone anymore. The next morning, the trap was sprung. Elena received another message confirming a meeting at the warehouse. Victor mobilized his team, surrounding the area in layers, unseen but ready. Elena arrived first, heart pounding, every sense alert. The warehouse was quiet, the air thick with dust and old oil. Then a voice emerged from the shadows, familiar, calm, female. A former contractor named Marissa Klein, someone Elena had once recommended for a minor role. Marissa revealed herself not as a lone actor, but as a messenger for a rival syndicate that had been watching Victor's internal turmoil closely. Richard Hale's betrayal had signaled vulnerability. Elena's rise had confirmed it. They wanted Victor destabilized, or replaced. Marissa offered Elena a deal: protection, power, independence, if she stepped away from Victor and fed them information. Elena didn't hesitate. She refused. The rejection triggered chaos. Armed figures moved in, faster than expected. Victor's team responded instantly. The warehouse erupted into controlled violence, precise, efficient, terrifying. Victor himself entered the fray, pulling Elena out of danger with a force that left no doubt about his priorities. When it was over, Marissa was gone, fleeing into the night, but the message was clear. This was no longer internal. The threat had expanded. Back at headquarters, Victor faced a hard truth. His enemies would keep coming, and Elena would always be a target, not because she was weak, but because she mattered. He offered her a choice he had never offered anyone before: step away, take a new identity, live safely beyond his world. Elena listened, then shook her head. She told him that surviving the cold had taught her something. Fear didn't disappear when you ran from it. It only followed quietly. She chose to stay. Victor accepted her decision with a nod, but inside, something hardened. From that night forward, Elena was no longer just protected, she was integrated. Trained, informed, trusted completely. The Mafia boss who once ruled through distance now ruled with connection, and that evolution made him more dangerous than ever. As spring approached, the city believed the storm had passed. But Victor and Elena knew better. Winter had only been the beginning. Spring arrived quietly, but peace did not follow. Victor Moretti's empire adapted to the season with calculated efficiency, yet beneath the polished surface, tension simmered. Elena's decision to stay had consequences that reached far beyond personal risk. Her integration into Victor's inner circle was no longer symbolic, it was operational. She attended strategy briefings that once excluded anyone without blood on their hands, and her presence changed the tone of the room. Men who spoke freely before now weighed their words, unsure how much Victor trusted her. He trusted her completely. That trust, Elena quickly learned, came with responsibility heavier than anything she had carried before. She was given access to intelligence streams, threat assessments, and contingency plans. The knowledge was overwhelming at first. Every report carried names, motives, timelines, lives that could be ruined or ended with a signature. Elena reminded herself why she stayed. If someone had to see clearly, it should be someone who remembered the cost of negligence. Victor watched her adapt with a mix of pride and unease. He had brought her into the storm to protect her, yet the storm was shaping her in ways he couldn't control. Their dynamic shifted subtly. They spoke more often, more honestly, sometimes arguing fiercely over decisions. Elena challenged him when strategies risked collateral damage. Victor pushed back when he felt restraint threatened authority. Yet each conflict ended in compromise, something unheard of in his reign. The organization noticed. Loyalty deepened among those who valued stability, but hardliners saw weakness. One afternoon, a threat assessment landed on Alina's desk that made her stomach tighten. A rival syndicate from the West Coast had begun probing Victor's supply lines, testing responses. It wasn't an outright attack, yet. It was a message. They knew about Elena. They knew she influenced Victor. They believed exploiting that influence could fracture him. Elena brought the report to Victor immediately. He listened, eyes narrowed, then asked the question she feared. Are you ready for what comes next? She answered without hesitation. Yes. The confrontation came sooner than expected. A shipment was intercepted, drivers missing, goods vanished. Victor's people recovered one driver alive, shaken but clear enough to deliver the warning. The rivals wanted a meeting. Neutral ground. Elena advised caution, pointing out the psychological angle. This wasn't about business. It was about testing Victor's limits. He agreed, but insisted Elena stay behind. She refused. This time, Victor didn't argue. The meeting took place at an old theater, long abandoned, its faded grandeur echoing past glory. Victor arrived with a controlled presence, Elena at his side, her calm demeanor masking the tension beneath. The rival leader, a man named Cole Ramirez, greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke openly, almost casually, about partnerships, about evolution, about the cost of clinging to outdated models of power. Then he turned his attention to Elena. He praised her intelligence, her resilience, her influence. He suggested that Victor's recent changes were admirable, but unsustainable. That a man like Victor needed an anchor, not a conscience. The insult was deliberate. Victor's silence was dangerous. Elena responded instead. She told Ramirez that power without discipline collapsed eventually, and that Victor's empire was stronger now because it learned from failure rather than denying it. Ramirez laughed, but his eyes hardened. The meeting ended without agreement, without violence, but the message was unmistakable. War was inevitable. In the weeks that followed, attacks escalated. Not direct assaults, but calculated. Disruptions, bribes, misinformation, small betrayals engineered to erode trust. Elena worked tirelessly to counter them, coordinating responses, tightening controls, identifying weak points. Sleep became optional. Victor watched her push herself too hard, the memory of her collapsed in the snow haunting him. One night, after she nearly fainted from exhaustion, he ordered her to rest. Not requested. Ordered. The argument that followed was raw. Elena accused him of protecting her at the cost of the organization. Victor accused her of forgetting she was human. The truth lay somewhere between. The breaking point came when Elena uncovered a planned attack targeting a charity event Victor sponsored publicly, a move designed to expose him and frame him as reckless. Elena insisted they cancel. Victor refused, arguing that retreat would signal fear. They compromised by transforming the event into a controlled operation, security layered so tightly it bordered on military. The event passed without incident, but the tension between them lingered. Later that night, alone in Victor's office, Elena finally voiced what had been building. She told him that if he wanted her loyalty, he needed to trust her judgment as much as she trusted his power. Victor listened, then surprised her by agreeing. He admitted that control had always been his armor, but armor grew heavy. He didn't want to rule alone anymore. The admission changed everything. From that point on, decisions were shared more openly. The war with Ramirez's syndicate continued, but Victor's empire responded with unity rather than fear. Elena became not just a strategist, but a symbol, a reminder that survival required more than strength. As spring deepened, the city remained oblivious to the battle unfolding beneath its streets. But within Victor's world, lines were drawn clearly. The rivals had underestimated one thing: the bond forged on a freezing Christmas night was not a weakness. It was a weapon. Summer heat settled over the city like a heavy breath, thick and relentless, and with it came a different kind of pressure. The quiet war Victor Moretti now fought was no longer subtle. Ramirez's syndicate had grown bolder, pushing past psychological tactics into open challenges that demanded response. Territory disputes flared at the edges of Victor's control, alliances were tested, and neutral parties began choosing sides. Through it all, Elena stood at the center of strategy, her mind sharp despite the fatigue etched into her eyes. She had become indispensable, not because Victor shielded her, but because she anticipated threats before they formed. Victor trusted her in ways he had never trusted anyone, and that trust reshaped how he moved. He consulted before striking. He planned for outcomes beyond dominance. Some saw it as evolution. Others whispered that Elena had softened him. Those whispers reached Ramirez, who decided it was time to cut the bond at its source. The warning came in the form of a near miss. Elena's convoy was delayed by traffic rerouted through a construction zone. A sudden crash blocked the street ahead, forcing the driver to stop. Within seconds, Victor's security detail detected movement, too coordinated to be coincidence. The response was immediate. Engines reversed, routes changed, drones deployed overhead. Whatever ambush had been planned dissolved before it could unfold. Elena emerged shaken but unharmed. Victor arrived minutes later, fury burning barely contained. The reality was undeniable. This was no longer about influence. Ramirez wanted Elena gone. That night, Victor convened his inner circle. His decision was swift and final. The war would end. No more testing boundaries. No more warnings. Elena listened as Victor outlined a decisive strategy, one that targeted Ramirez's operations simultaneously across cities, cutting supply lines, freezing finances, and exposing corrupt ties to law enforcement that Ramirez relied on. It was ruthless, efficient. Elena understood the necessity, but something in her hesitated. She warned Victor that escalation carried consequences beyond their control. He acknowledged it, then asked her the hardest question yet. Do you trust me to finish this? Elena met his gaze and answered yes. The operation unfolded like a storm. Over 48 hours, Ramirez's syndicate collapsed in pieces, raids triggered by anonymous tips, accounts seized, partners turning on one another. The pressure forced Ramirez into the open. Desperate, he made a final move, kidnapping a close associate of Elena's from her past, someone she had kept separate from Victor's world. The message was clear. This was personal now. When Elena learned what Ramirez had done, guilt slammed into her. She believed her presence had caused this. Victor, however, saw only one truth. Ramirez had crossed a line. The rescue plan was risky, requiring speed over caution. Elena insisted on being involved, refusing to sit behind walls while someone suffered for her choices. Victor resisted, then relented. They moved together. The location was a remote warehouse outside the city, guarded but not fortified. The extraction was fast and precise. No speeches. No hesitation. Victor personally ensured the captive was freed. Ramirez was not there. He had fled, leaving chaos behind him. The victory felt incomplete. Back at headquarters, tension remained high. Victor knew Ramirez wouldn't stop running unless forced. Elena, haunted by the consequences of the war, questioned whether power could ever truly protect the innocent. She confessed her doubts to Victor late one night, admitting that sometimes she feared becoming numb to it all. Victor surprised her by sharing his own fear, that losing her would undo every change he'd fought to make. The confession lingered between them, unspoken feelings finally acknowledged without being named. Days later, intelligence arrived placing Ramirez at a private airstrip, preparing to disappear. Victor prepared to end it. Elena asked to speak first. She believed confronting Ramirez directly could force surrender, reduce collateral damage. Victor disagreed, but listened. Against every instinct, he allowed her to try. The meeting was tense, raw. Ramirez was tired, his confidence fractured. Elena confronted him not with threats, but with truth. His empire was already gone. Continuing would only deepen destruction. For a moment, it seemed to work. Then Ramirez smiled and revealed a final contingency, evidence that could bring down Victor's legitimate front operations, ready to release if anything happened to him. It was a stalemate. Elena left shaken. Victor chose a different approach. He negotiated, not with Ramirez, but with those holding his leash. The evidence disappeared. Ramirez lost protection. He vanished for good, stripped of power, hunted by enemies he could no longer control. The war ended not with a spectacle, but with silence. In the aftermath, Victor and Elena stood together on the rooftop of headquarters, city lights glowing beneath them. Summer winds cut through the heat. They had survived, but at a cost. Elena realized then that survival wasn't about winning. It was about choosing what kind of power you were willing to live with. Victor knew one thing with certainty: the night he found her freezing in the snow had changed his fate. And now, nothing, not war, not fear, not ambition, would ever separate them again. Autumn arrived with a crisp bite in the air, and the city began shedding its summer heat like a memory, unaware of the turbulence that still roared in the underworld controlled by Victor Moretti. After Ramirez's defeat, one might have assumed peace had returned, but in Victor's world, there was no such thing as lasting calm. The removal of a rival merely created space for others to test boundaries, and Elena, now fully integrated into the inner workings of his empire, remained at the center of every critical decision. She had grown sharper, quicker, and more decisive, earning not only Victor's unwavering trust but also the cautious respect of those who had once doubted her. Yet with power came scrutiny, and she was no longer invisible. Every glance from a subordinate, every whisper in the hallways, hinted at the simmering envy and resentment that could erupt at any moment. Victor noticed it too, though he rarely let it show. His protective instincts were constant, almost physical in nature, especially when Elena was forced to face challenges that could have been avoided. One evening, as the amber glow of the city bathed his office, Victor received reports of a coordinated cyber attack on several of his offshore accounts. It wasn't massive, but it was precise, executed by someone who understood the inner mechanics of his operations. Elena was immediately brought into the situation, and together they traced the source, a former employee who had been dismissed months earlier for minor but persistent breaches of protocol. It was personal. That night, Elena worked tirelessly, reconstructing digital trails, isolating vulnerabilities, and identifying every avenue the attacker could exploit. Victor observed from across the room, noting the precision and calm in her methodical approach. She had grown not only as his strategist but as a pillar of his empire. When she finally traced the attack back to a hidden network in a neighboring city, Victor prepared for retaliation. He insisted Elena remain behind, but she refused. This time, there was no hesitation. She was as committed to the defense of their empire as Victor was to maintaining control. Their operation required coordination and precision, something they had cultivated together since the Christmas night that had changed both their lives. Elena traveled under strict security, moving silently through the city, while Victor orchestrated support from headquarters. Hours later, they cornered the rogue employee. The confrontation was swift and silent. Threats were issued, and compliance secured without bloodshed. Yet Victor knew this was only the beginning. Disloyalty, even from a minor player, could inspire others. Back at headquarters, the mood was tense but controlled. Victor called a meeting with his senior staff, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and loyalty. Elena, now visibly confident and composed, spoke on risk mitigation and accountability, her voice commanding attention without arrogance. The room listened. The message was clear: the Empire would not tolerate negligence, betrayal, or incompetence, regardless of rank. Even with external threats contained, internal pressures continued to mount. Richard Hale's shadow had long passed, but the fear of ambition and envy remained. Some executives tested limits, attempting subtle manipulations to challenge Elena's authority. Victor, recognizing the threat, acted decisively, reinforcing her position publicly, ensuring that no one could question her legitimacy or her role. This overt support strengthened Elena's resolve but also brought with it a burden of constant vigilance. One rainy afternoon, Victor and Elena were reviewing intelligence reports when a message arrived, marked urgent and encrypted. Elena unlocked it, revealing coordinates in a single phrase: "Time is running out." The location was a remote estate outside the city, heavily wooded and secluded. Victor and Elena exchanged a look. This was no ordinary message. It was a trap designed to test them, to probe their weaknesses. They planned meticulously. Every movement was calculated. Every potential outcome anticipated. When they arrived at the estate, it was eerily quiet, the overcast sky casting shadows that danced across the tree line. Elena led the way, Victor following, ever aware of their surroundings. Inside the main house, they discovered signs of occupation, digital equipment, maps, and files strewn across the floor. The perpetrators were long gone, but the evidence revealed their intent. Someone was attempting to destabilize Victor's empire by targeting Elena directly. Anger surged within Victor, but he controlled it, focusing instead on strategic measures. Elena sifted through the materials, her mind racing. The complexity of the plot was impressive, almost elegant, but the motives were clear: weaken Victor by exploiting his strongest loyalty. For the first time, Elena fully realized the extent to which her presence in Victor's life had shifted the power dynamics of the criminal world around them. They returned to headquarters with renewed purpose. Victor authorized enhanced security measures for both the organization and Elena personally, including advanced surveillance, armored transport, and trusted operatives strategically placed in all critical positions. Elena, while initially frustrated by the restrictions, began implementing additional protocols to safeguard the company from internal and external threats, blending her expertise with Victor's influence. As autumn deepened, the city seemed oblivious to the high-stakes maneuvers occurring in the shadows. Elena and Victor continued working in tandem, their partnership growing stronger, their bond unspoken but palpable. There were moments of tension, moments where authority clashed with intuition, but ultimately, they learned to anticipate each other's decisions. By late October, Victor had orchestrated a series of preemptive strikes against rival factions, effectively securing his operations and sending a message that challenges to his empire would no longer be tolerated. Elena's intelligence and strategic foresight played a pivotal role in these successes, further cementing her place not just as an ally, but as a cornerstone of his leadership. Through it all, their personal connection remained a constant undercurrent, subtle, protective, unacknowledged in public, yet undeniable. Both knew that their partnership was not just professional, it was forged in adversity, loyalty, and shared trials. And while the city went about its daily life, oblivious to the silent wars waged behind closed doors, Victor and Elena prepared for whatever came next, aware that in their world, peace was temporary, trust was precious, and the bond they shared could very well determine the fate of everything they had built. Autumn ended, leaving behind the first whispers of winter, and with it came the understanding that the challenges ahead would be the most dangerous yet. Yet Victor and Elena stood ready, together, unyielding, and unbreakable. Winter returned to the city with a brittle chill, painting the streets in gray and white, and Victor Moretti felt the weight of the past year more heavily than ever. The events that had begun on that freezing Christmas night had set in motion a chain of consequences that now defined the empire he commanded. Elena Carter had become more than an assistant, more than a strategist, she was a partner in every sense, a mind capable of matching his own, and a heart that had earned his fierce protection. Their bond was no longer unspoken, it was forged in fire, snow, betrayal, and survival. As the first snowflakes fell, Victor surveyed the city from his penthouse office, the skyline a mixture of twinkling lights and shadows, a reflection of his own duality. This winter was different. Ramirez was gone, defeated and exiled from the criminal world, but new threats had emerged. Rivals who had watched Victor's earlier struggles now sought opportunities, exploiting gaps in loyalty and influence, testing the edges of his authority. Elena was at his side, poring over intelligence reports, cross-referencing threats with past events, her focus absolute. She had become the lens through which Victor saw potential danger, the advisor who caught what he might have missed. One evening, a coded message arrived, indicating a possible coordinated strike on one of Victor's key logistics hubs. The message was precise, terrifying in its clarity, and it carried a personal undertone, a warning that Elena's involvement had made Victor a target. Without hesitation, Victor mobilized his inner circle, but this time, he ensured Elena would be present in the field. Their presence together was no longer symbolic, it was strategic. Days of planning followed, every detail accounted for: entrances, exits, personnel, security redundancies, contingencies for every conceivable scenario. Victor and Elena worked side by side, coordinating teams, reviewing tactical movements, and predicting the rivals' next steps. When the strike came, it was sudden, violent, but precise. Armed operatives attempted to breach the logistics hub under cover of darkness, but Victor's preparations and Elena's anticipatory measures turned the attack into a controlled trap. One by one, intruders were contained or neutralized without unnecessary bloodshed. It was efficient, calculated, and devastating. After the confrontation, Victor and Elena stood amidst the aftermath, the hub secure, their teams exhausted but alive. Elena's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her. Victor placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, and for a brief moment, the ruthless Mafia boss allowed himself to acknowledge what the ordeal had meant. She had survived, she had thrived, and she had grown into a partner whose value was beyond measure. That night, back at the penthouse, Victor allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought back to the night he had found Elena collapsed in the snow, her life hanging by a thread, and the realization struck him with force. Everything that had followed, the wars, the betrayals, the growth, the victories, had all stemmed from that singular event. Elena had survived, yes, but together they had built something stronger. The empire was no longer just Victor's, it was theirs, shaped by trust, respect, and an unspoken understanding of mutual dependence. In the following weeks, Victor consolidated his power further, restructuring alliances, securing new routes, and ensuring that every potential rival knew that crossing him, or her, was unthinkable. Elena was instrumental in this process, her insight into human behavior, strategy, and loyalty proving invaluable. They moved like a unit, anticipatory, synchronized, their minds aligned in ways that few could comprehend. Yet, even in this peak of control, Victor knew that the underworld was unpredictable. There would always be challenges, threats, and forces beyond his influence. What mattered was the bond he and Elena shared, the understanding that neither would face the storm alone. One snowy evening, as winter deepened, Elena approached Victor in his office. She had reviewed operational reports, identified weaknesses, and recommended strategic adjustments. Victor listened, silently acknowledging her expertise, the respect between them palpable. She paused, looking out over the city with him, and spoke softly, "We've survived everything. And yet, I feel like this is only the beginning." Victor did not respond immediately. He allowed the weight of her words to settle. Finally, he said, "We've learned what matters. And as long as we face it together, nothing can break us." The words were simple, but their significance was profound. That night, they walked through the penthouse, the snow falling outside unnoticed, the city lights casting a muted glow across the room. For the first time in years, Victor felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: peace. Not triumph, not control, not power, but a quiet certainty that the person he had fought to protect, the woman who had endured the cold and returned stronger than ever, would remain at his side. As the winter deepened, the city remained oblivious to the battles waged in the shadows, the rivalries neutralized, and the delicate balance of loyalty maintained. Victor and Elena continued their work, planning, coordinating, and securing their empire. Each challenge that arose was met with precision, every threat anticipated, every potential betrayal accounted for. And through it all, their bond, forged on that fateful Christmas night, remained unbreakable. The snow continued to fall, coating the city in white, reflecting the lights of a metropolis unaware of the silent rulers who watched over it. Victor Moretti, the Mafia boss feared by many, and Elena Carter, the woman who had survived his world and reshaped it, stood side by side, ready for whatever storms the future might bring. They had endured betrayal, danger, and death itself. They had survived the snow, the attacks, and the wars. And as they looked out over the city, neither doubted that together, they were unstoppable. This was the culmination of a journey that began in the cold and ended with fire tempered by trust. Winter had returned, but for Victor and Elena, it was no longer a threat, it was a reminder of how far they had come, and how far they would go, together.